This story is about siblings-in-law who, when asked to repay borrowed money, initially reacted with anger, but are now trembling and eager to return the money. What could have happened? Let's find out together. Before we start the story, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot to our channel.
Hello. I'm a woman in my 30s who's been married for 2 years. My husband and I, we were what you'd call guy friends and girlfriends for a very long time. We've been friends for over a decade, starting from our college days, and eventually, our relationship progressed from dating to marriage during a college reunion. It's not that I never saw my husband as a potential partner. His cheerful and bright personality always made him the life of the party among our peers, and naturally, I was drawn to him. However, back then, we didn't have many opportunities to get closer. What with job hunting and all. It wasn't until we got older that we really saw each other in a different light. And considering our age, we naturally started thinking about marriage. I'm very close with my family. We hug and kiss, whether it's my siblings or parents. And we talk on the phone every day without fail. It's a warm and loving relationship. However, during our dating period, my husband rarely mentioned his family. He would briefly mention family dinners or holiday plans, but that was about it. Later on, I found out he has 2 older sisters and a younger sister. He said he hesitated to bring it up because typically, it might not be the most welcome news. I was quite shocked when I heard this. It's not your average family dynamic. The idea of dealing with even 1 or 2 sisters-in-law can be daunting in a marriage. Despite my concerns, it seemed like my husband wasn't very close to his family. There were times he wouldn't go home for the holidays, and since he had been living on his own since college, I figured they weren't that close. Before I met my husband, I always hoped to marry someone from a family as close-knit as mine. Our level of closeness might seem a bit much to some. We talk on the phone daily and have regular family gatherings, which surprises many. However, learning that he had 3 sisters-in-law, I found myself oddly comforted by the thought of a more detached family dynamic. About a year into our relationship, as marriage talks began to surface from both families, we naturally started planning the wedding. This led me to meet his sisters for the first time. The eldest 2 had strong personalities, quite outspoken and direct, while the youngest, still in college, seemed purely innocent. As the wedding approached, we saw each other more often, either at meals or through their involvement in our wedding preparations. Until then, we were cautious around each other, so I had no significant complaints and felt relieved, even growing fond of them. But as they say, you never really know until you're in it. After our honeymoon, I noticed a distinct change in the attitude of my mother-in-law and sisters-in-law. I'm not a high earner, but I've been with a company for 10 years since graduating college, earning an average salary for my position, but benefiting from excellent company perks. My in-laws were aware of this, and one day, the youngest sister-in-law called me, asking about a resort my husband and I had visited, expressing her desire to go. It was a resort provided by my company for a vacation. Concerned about how a college student could afford such a place, I mentioned that it was a company perk, and she retorted, "Can't I use it since I'm family?" I explained that it was for employees only and required aid verification, suggesting we could all go together with her mother another time. Her response was dismissive, and she ended the call abruptly. I thought little of it, attributing her reaction to youth. I had mentioned in front of the family that we should all go together, which might have caused some confusion. About an hour later, the eldest sister-in-law called. I was in a meeting, so I texted that I'd call back. She bombarded me with messages, demanding I call her immediately. Before the echo of my ringtone had fully faded, my eldest sister-in-law picked up the phone and accused me, "Sister-in-law, I heard you were mocking our youngest earlier." I was so shocked. I tried to deny it, but she wouldn't listen. It turned out, she heard that I had belittled our youngest sister-in-law by saying she doesn't understand because she doesn't work. All I did was explain something that could only be understood by experiencing it firsthand. Trying to clear the misunderstanding, I was cut off with, "I didn't expect this from you. It's really too much. We shouldn't do this to family." And she hung up. Attempts to call back were ignored. Eventually, through my husband, we managed to somewhat resolve the issue. This was just one of many times I found myself misunderstood by my in-laws. Things that seemed common sense to me were somehow offensive to them, and it started to wear me down. The thought of trying to get along with my mother-in-law and sisters-in-law began to seem futile. My husband respected how I felt. Would you believe it if I said we had over a dozen of these incidents within the first year of our marriage? It felt like they were constantly looking for something to criticize. Eventually, even my relationship with my husband began to suffer. Despite knowing I wasn't at fault, the constant friction was exhausting. I felt it deeply. In the end, my husband made a decision. A year into our marriage, we started sleeping in separate rooms and agreed to communicate with his family only through him. We informed his family of our decision. After that, peace returned to our household. My relationship with my husband improved, and we began enjoying our days again, living our newlywed life to the fullest and having fun like before. One day, I received yet another call from my youngest sister-in-law. Given the circumstances, I debated whether to answer or not. But after she called several times in a row, I couldn't just ignore it, so I picked up. Before I could even ask what was wrong, she was sobbing uncontrollably over the phone. Confused and concerned, I tried to comfort her, asking, "Why are you crying? What happened?" But she was crying so hard she could barely speak. Worried, I quickly took a half-day off and rushed to her apartment. When I arrived, she was still in tears. Trying to calm her down, I asked her to at least tell me what was going on. Hesitantly, she looked at me and said, "Big sis, I don't think I can register for my last semester." I was puzzled since our family had been pooling money together for her tuition fees. I wondered if she had gotten pregnant or if something terrible had happened. The worry was overwhelming. But what she said next shocked me even more. She told me she had gone to a casino with some friends, got drunk, and was egged on to bet in a game eventually losing all her money, including her last semester's tuition fees, in one night. To be honest, I was dumbfounded. She was only 24 and had ventured into such a place. I had never visited such a place myself. I scolded her. "Do you even realize what you've done? This is gambling." All she did was cry even more. Sitting there, sighing heavily, my sister-in-law suddenly knelt down and begged, "Could you please lend me $2,000? If our family finds out, it would be a disaster." I knew this wasn't a simple matter, so I said I'd discuss it with my in-laws and my husband. She cried even harder, saying, "If our family finds out, I'd rather die. Just go, please." Eventually, I decided to lend her the money from my savings, under the condition that she reflect on her actions and pay it back by working part-time during the semester. I transferred the money and made sure she paid her tuition fees before I left. I felt I couldn't keep this from my husband, so I told him when I got home. He sighed heavily upon hearing it and almost shaved his head in frustration, but I stopped him, fearing it might lead to bigger issues if we don't talk about problems as a family in the future. I hoped my sister-in-law would learn something from this experience. Thus, the incident remained a secret among the three of us. However, after lending her the money and setting up a repayment plan, she didn't contact us at all. After about 3 months, I finally sent her a message asking, "Have you found the part-time job yet? I wrote this article. Please translate it into English in a way that aligns well with American culture and sentiment, making it easy for Americans to understand." And then I got a reply saying, "Just wait a bit. It's exam season, you know." I was flabbergasted. Paying tuition and nearing the end of the semester without having done any work seemed outrageous. Naturally, there was no contact after the exams ended either. Thinking texts wouldn't cut it, I called, only to be met every time with, "Why are you rushing me? Do I owe you something? I can't focus on job hunting because of you," mixed with sighs of annoyance. Eventually, I discussed it with my husband and decided to also talk to my mother-in-law and my first and second sisters-in-law. It was during a recent holiday. After we all had our meal and were about to have dessert, my husband started to speak. Just as he seemed about to share his thoughts, the youngest sister-in-law screamed and ran into the master bedroom to cry, clearly trying to silence us. Everyone was initially shocked, but my husband told them to sit down and began talking. My mother-in-law was so shocked she lay down, and my first and second sisters-in-law were furiously yelling at the youngest to open the door, kicking it in frustration. Eventually, the youngest sister-in-law came out and confessed everything. There was nothing to be done immediately, so she agreed to focus solely on job hunting and to start repaying me $500,000 every month for 4 months from her first salary. We thought the holiday would pass in a somewhat solemn mood. Suddenly, the next day, my first and second sisters-in-law called me over. I thought they might need me for a trip to the in-laws, or to give their mother some spending money, but that wasn't it. They confronted me saying, "It's a bit much for you to do this. The kid must have felt comfortable contacting you since she had nowhere else to turn.
How could you just spill everything to your husband, right?
I also think it was too much. Weren't you supposed to keep it a secret with the youngest? I exploded, waking up everyone, including my mother-in-law and husband, turning everything upside down, as if vomiting out all the grievances I had endured. I didn't single anyone out, but I said, "This is really too much. You talk about family, but you don't treat me like family at all." Someone gather the money and pay back what the sister-in-law borrowed right this instant. Then, everyone turned into mute as if they had eaten honey. I was glaring in disbelief when suddenly my husband said, "Honestly, aren't my sisters just as much to blame? They both owe me money too." This was news to me, and while I was still in shock, he added, "They need to pay me back within this month. I can't wait any longer. I'm so disgusted by their actions that I need to get the money back sooner. If it goes past February, I'm filing a lawsuit." It turns out, this was money he lent them before we got married, to help each sister with 20 million won because they didn't have enough money for their weddings, and they hadn't paid him back yet. Even the brothers-in-law, who had been sitting there, somewhat obliviously, became aware of the situation, causing quite a stir. While the sisters-in-law were freaking out at me, my husband was clear. "If you don't pay back the money, I'll seriously sue. So figure it out." He's been ignoring all contact from his family since then. Now my sisters-in-law keep contacting me, saying, "Sister-in-law, please extend the deadline. Where would we suddenly find such money? And please, just take our calls." But I'm ignoring them all. I'm not sure if my husband will actually sue next month. But considering how they've ignored me all this time, it feels like they're getting their just desserts.
How can all of them be so obsessed with money? It seems there are surprisingly many who borrow money and then get angry when asked to pay it back. Shouldn't we pursue a lawsuit to ensure my sisters-in-law repay the borrowed money?